Sport Business. Global Sports Intelligence.
Hello and welcome to the Sport Business Podcast with me, John Rest, Chief Correspondent of Sport Business News. Martin, as you are well aware, is now playing his bagpipes in Boston, so I am joined by an able deputy, Joseph Perry, editor of Sport Business Media. Today, no surprise, we're going to talk a little bit about what we've noticed so far at the World Cup. We'll also chat about E1 Series, the power boating event that I was in Dubrovnik for last weekend. Then we'll go inside the deals where Ben Cronin will come in and talk about the sponsorship portfolio of FIFA at this year's World Cup. I'm sure you've seen plenty of branding during the games. And for the final part, we will, of course, go any other business and a look ahead. Joe, welcome back to the pod as a co-host.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thanks for having me back. It's a bit like the role I played at the Seven-a-Side tournament, I guess, which is occupying some space while our more talented colleagues take a breather.
Well, I've only just recovered from that, I have to say. The heat of Dubrovnik helped the muscles. World Cup, have you got suitable World Cup fever?
I would say enjoyed some matches. I haven't watched everything. I think that's going to be challenging this year, especially. My sweepstake team, Germany, got off to a flying start. I really enjoyed Netherlands, Japan the other day as well. Very good match. I think one of the challenges so far is, because there are so many different kickoff times, it's actually quite difficult to build a routine. So we were just in Memphis the other day, and someone said, are we putting the Spain match on? And I had to think, wait, there's a 5 o'clock kickoff time. Similar thing the other night. I watched a match at 9. It was great. I went back the next day thinking there'd be something on then, but actually that day it was 10 o'clock kickoff. So it's been a little bit difficult to build a routine. But as the tournament warms up, I suspect so will my World fever. What about yourself?
Yeah, you're right. Every tournament we've had in recent years has had kind of 3 time slots, hasn't it? You've just kind of got used to, if I leave the office at this time, I can get home for the second half type thing. And it's completely up in the air this time. It's slightly confusing. I think the last World Cup I can remember that had different kickoff times, but, really struggling to watch all games would have been 2002 in Japan, Korea. But I was a university student in those days. I watched around sleeping and drinking, so it's a bit more difficult. In recent years, we've been kind of spoiled, I guess, by the kickoff times in the UK. So, yeah, it has been a bit challenging. And just because of the nature of the tournament, how hot it is, actually most of the better games seem to have been at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning in the UK because it's a bit cooler when they've been kicking off. So, yeah, good fun. I've enjoyed it so far. As you say, it's been a bit of a slow burner, but there's been some good games. We're going to mix it up a little bit this week. We're going to go straight to Martin, who sent a voice note from the US, and then we're going to have our first hydration break, and then we'll be back with In the Newsroom.
Hello, London. Greetings from the picturesque town of Kennebunkport in Maine. I'm just having a few days R&R before returning to Boston for Scotland-Morocco on Friday. Give you a flavour of the World Cup experience, or the US hosting anyway. Obviously, Boston's one of 11 US host cities. Tartan Army's takeover is well underway. It was well underway 3 hours into our flight, actually, when they announced that they'd completely run out of beer. You'll have seen, I'm sure, the Fenway Park videos of the march from town, the bagpipes. There was probably anything from 5,000 to 8,000 Scots at Fenway, which was brilliant. It wasn't an accident. It was meticulously organised by the Red Sox and the SFA, I think. They provided them with Red Sox shirts for the Scotland flag. And yeah, it was really cool. I wasn't there, but I saw the videos. They basically filled up the stadium for what was a struggling team at the moment and sold endless amounts of beer, created a great atmosphere, sold them merch, and got loads of good media value off the back of it. So hats off to them. Stadium experience at the game. So I was at Scotland-Haiti at Foxborough, or Gillette Stadium, as it's known. I mean, the event presentation was off the scale. They kind of lent into all the NFL elements, huge screens, LEDs, connectivity. So when Gianni's talking about his 104 Super Bowls, yes, that's PR spin. Canada and Mexico, of course, expect a different experience, but it really had that feel. It was so over the top, but in a kind of wonderfully high production value way. The music, it was like a theatrical performance, even if the kickoff times have actually been slipping because they're trying to achieve so much kind of pre-match. And Wi-Fi was super fast. You could just watch a goal after it happened. Didn't have to queue for a beer. Main reason being, well, 2 reasons. Scotland fans have been drinking for 12 hours, so that was one reason. But it was also $18 for a Budweiser, £13.50 people in their 60s getting ID'd. But welcome to America. It was sold out, 64,146 announced. I don't think the ticket prices came down massively before the game. There was a slight drop in resale prices, but I don't think it slipped below the very high face prices that you're paying. We had category 2 tickets, and it was, the view was brilliant because we were so high up, but it was all a bit farcical. Category 2 tickets, $460 I paid for a ticket, face price plus the FIFA 15% commission. And we were literally 5 rows back from the top of the top bleachers. At one point, thought we were going to need a Sherpa and a mountain goat just to get my dad up there. But we got there. Stadium entry was okay. 40 minutes. It was slow. It was safe though. No complaints on that front. The controversial $80 Boston stadium train, which was obviously quadruple the price, what it would usually cost. I'd probably say fail, not epic fail, but fail. They were trying to move 20,000 fans on, 14 trains, but they were insisting that they all had a seat. I don't know if that's a legal thing, but, in Europe, certainly in the UK, you would have people not crushed, but standing up safely. But because they didn't, they had huge spaces in the trains where they could be standing and people were queuing for hours. Match finished at 11 p.m. local time. We maybe joined the queue at 11:45. We got back to Boston South at 2 a.m. And because there was no hotels when I booked in Boston, we were staying 45 minutes away. We got home at 3 a.m. for an 11 p.m. match finish, which is pretty excessive. Ambush marketing prize, the clever marketing prize would go to Levi's, who you've probably seen already covering up the logo at the stadium in Santa Clara in a very clever way. But maybe in Boston, we'd give it to BetMGM for flying a biplane all around the stadium before kickoff with obviously banner advertising on it. I was looking out for maybe FIFA's lawyers playing in hot pursuit, but they were not. I think they seemed to get away with it. Overall, bigger picture, does USA know a World Cup's going on? It depends where you are, clearly, and this is just a snippet of the experience across the whole country. Clearly, it is so vast. Our bus driver told us to have a fun FIFA Cup, he said. And we were having dinner in Rockport on the North Shore of Massachusetts, watching, US-Paraguay. Huge moment, host country playing in the first game of a World Cup. Big moment. You wouldn't have thought everybody's tuning in because you know what the US is like, but we were eating at a horseshoe bar. US scored, not a peep out of anybody, all crowded around the bar just eating their dinner. A couple of people noticed maybe they'd scored. Everyone else just kept chatting. And it was a 9 p.m. kickoff, local Eastern time, played West Coast, and the bar closed at 10 p.m. So at halftime, everybody was kicked out. So, the US machine plows on regardless. To be honest, the Knicks NBA Finals was the big story and is the big story here. But we'll see what next week brings. I'm going to the Morocco game. I'll maybe check in next week with a maybe slightly briefer note, but wanted to give you as much detail as I've got from here. Hope you're all enjoying the late night viewing and your YouTube highlights, and catch up with you all soon.
From private equity to global media and US college sports, unlock the most trusted data and insights in our reports. Explore more at sportbusiness.com.
Okay, welcome to the main part of the Sport Business Podcast, the newsroom. Joe, we've just heard from Martin there. He's got the luxury of watching the games in a normal time zone. We haven't been, but you wrote a piece this week on the first kind of round of TV ratings from the World Cup. What tickled your fancy?
Yeah, I've been rounding up World Cup ratings, as you say. I know this can be a slightly dry subject, even for boffins like us, so I thought I'd turn this into a bit of a game if you're up for it.
Yep, go on then. Crack on.
All right. Well, without further ado, first and probably last ever, play your World Cup TV ratings cards right. So the US team's opening match of the last World Cup, that was against Wales. That got an average audience of 7.7 million on Fox. So for a very easy starter, was the audience for the first match this time higher or lower?
Oh, higher, surely.
Absolutely higher, yet 16 million for the US's opening match across the Fox platforms, which was a record for a US match at a World Cup. A little bit more challenging. What about the audience in Germany for their opening match against Curacao? Higher or lower than Fox's 16 million for the US?
Well, yeah, this was a big one, wasn't it? I think this is something over 22 million, right?
Very good, yeah, 23.4 million average on ARD. But what about the last World Cup? Was Germany's opening match then higher or lower?
Oh, the kickoff time was very favourable this time for Germany, wasn't it? It would have been, I'd say it's higher this time than last time, surely.
Yep, I hope people are playing along at home as well. Very good so far. Actually, the last World Cup was way lower. I don't know if you remember this at the time, but obviously there was some fallout. There was the dispute about the armbands, and then German players were covering their mouths. So I think that left a bad taste. And it was on at 2 o'clock on a Wednesday afternoon. So actually, about less than 10 million people watching that match. Let's go digital. Keep the pace up. Quick game's a good game. Capelli TV's peak audience for Brazil's opening match against Morocco on Saturday, higher or lower than the 9.2 million.
Oh, Kaze, higher.
Yep. In fact, it peaked at 12.4 million, which is significant. You'll probably know why, because it's the first individual YouTube channel to top 10 million concurrent views.
Wow, that is massive. I wonder, they're in Portugal as well, right? I know Portugal haven't played yet, but it'd be fascinating to see how Live Mode get on with their Portuguese numbers. I'm sure we'll look at them as the tournament develops.
Yep, we'll keep our eyes peeled on that one. What about the average audience in the US for Spanish language coverage on Telemundo and Peacock? The very first match between Mexico and South Africa, higher or lower than Kaze?
Lower.
It is lower, you're right, 12.1 million, but that's still a record audience for a Spanish language broadcast of the World Cup in the US. Back to Europe, the average audience for Spain coverage, that's on RTVE, at their shock 0-0 draw against Cape Verde.
Surely lower.
It is lower. Very good. At 7.3 million, but if you add that to the zone, it's a very healthy 65% share, which brings me to the very last one. BBC's share for its coverage of Scotland's heroic 1-0 victory that we just heard all about, higher or lower than 65%.
Oh, is it 2 a.m. in the morning, wasn't it? Oh, but it's got to be higher purely because if you're up, what else are you watching?
Let's not answer that question, but yes, it is higher. They're reported to be 78% and actually 80% from 2 a.m. onwards. So the Scots turning out in numbers to watch that one.
Yeah, I saw the number in Australia, I think it was an average of 3 million for Australia. Great win over Turkey, which I think was in the middle of the night here, but kind of worked quite well for Australian audiences. But there was an interview with an AFL player who was absolutely furious that they had to play games at the same time as the national team were playing. You know, he was like, this is a once in every 4 years, everyone should get a chance to watch it. And he was playing himself. So yeah, maybe there just needs to be a scheduling issue in Australian sport.
Yeah, we're seeing that in the domestic market as well, obviously, with the Nits.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Sort of overshadowing the start of the World Cup, both in terms of broadcast and then quite literally with what was going on in New York as well. But I guess the World Cup's going to get a bit more of a free run over the next few weeks.
Yeah, one thing this is a very parochial thing, so apologies to our international listeners, of which we have plenty. You noticed something on was it the BBC promoting the ITV's coverage or the other way around? Now, this never used to happen. It used to be impossible to find out. You used to go on the BBC and there would be no coverage that there was another game on unless they had it. But this year, everyone's friendly.
Yeah, so this is one of those things that kind of gets reported and then forgotten about. And actually had to go back and check that actually, yes, there were reports about this, which is that the BBC and ITV are cross-promoting each other's coverage. So when one broadcast ends, they'll say, and head over now to the BBC and iPlayer for coverage of the next match, which obviously, I guess, the idea is a rising tide. And also, I'm sure FIFA are very happy with the matches being signalled. Probably with 104 matches, it's a bit more confusing for your viewer. So yeah, that's new. That was weird to hear. A couple of other things that I've noticed. One of them being that Sky has launched what they're calling a real-time channel, which is quite interesting. There is something a bit like this for Sky's main event channel, which basically reduces the latency on its IPTV services. So if you have Sky Stream or Sky Glass, often you're quite behind the broadcast. And so I had a bit of an experiment last night to see how much the difference was. And actually, if you're watching on the normal BBC channel on Sky Stream and you go over to the real-time channel, you jump forward 17 seconds, which actually in the context of a football match is a huge amount. I mean, that's the difference between being at one end of the field and another. And so when I look at the BBC iPlayer website, which is streaming in UHD to see a link compares, and I was 10 seconds behind the original stream. So actually it's half a minute behind if you're an iPlayer compared to the new real-time channel.
That's an extraordinary long lag. I remember, you get goal alerts on your phone. I was watching an Arsenal game on a stream once, and it was a legal stream, I have to say. and the other team had a corner, and my phone beeped. I was like, oh, I nearly swore there. Oh no, we've conceded a goal. And actually, the lag was so slow that Arsenal went up the other end and 15, 20 seconds later scored a goal. So that's not ideal, is it? Especially when it's your team playing. You can kind of live with it when you don't have a skin in the game.
No, exactly. Actually, it reminds me. So I grew up in a flat above a bookies and next to a pub. And we
what a
had
life.
Exactly. Between two vices, we had satellite TV and the bookies and the pub both had terrestrial TV. So my first memory, I think, of a major international football tournament would have been 2004. And basically listening out for the reactions of the penalty shootout and knowing about 10 seconds before whether a penalty was going in or not. So it takes me back to that. But it's interesting, worth keeping an eye on, because that's something that's come up with people in the build-up to this tournament, saying, actually, watch out for latency. This is a time when people really do notice. And I think from Sky's perspective, it's not good at all for reputation if it becomes known as a platform that's 10, 20, 30 seconds behind. So you can see why they've brought these channels in. There's one for ITV, there's one for BBC, and hopefully people won't be disadvantaged as a result of streaming versus watching on the traditional means. That was quite interesting. The other great debate of our time, the ITV studio versus the BBC studio. Where do you fall down on that argument?
Yeah, it looks absolutely fabulous. The ITV one, I have to say, I've spent a bit of time in New York, because, I know exactly where that is as well, that view. It is iconic, their ability to then kind of superimpose the team lineups onto the buildings behind them. I think it looks amazing. But, I think it's very harsh just to kind of slam the BBC for not being there when they have to kind of pinch the pennies and stuff like that. So, yeah, of course they would be out there if it made economic sense. But does it detract from the viewers? I'm not sure. I mean, it looks great, I have to say. But what about yourself? I mean, you've worked in the public sector, Joe. You know how much money can be spent and where it can't be spent.
Yeah, my experience is that money could usually be found if someone's senior was going to have a nice holiday. So it slightly goes against my experience. But yeah, I can see where you're coming from. BBC is damned if it does, damned if it doesn't. But I do feel as a viewer as though I'm missing out on something. A World Cup is a cultural event as much as it's a sporting event. And it is nice to be transported there. It's nice to get a kind of a feel of what's going on the ground. Of course, if ITV are anchored in New York, then quite clearly they're not going to be able to tell us what's going on in Mexico City, for example. But still, I think it's quite nice just to see something different, vicariously experience something else. So yes, it is a shame. And the other thing as well is, I mean, for the BBC, their talent and production team will be working in the middle of the night, 2 a.m. on a match between two unfancied teams. Can't be much fun for them, surely. At least ITV know that if it's a drab draw, they still get to go out in Brooklyn afterwards.
Yeah, well, no one ever thinks of those people. Though you think you're working on a World Cup, you should kind of be grateful. But yeah, it's I think, yeah, as you say, whatever decision the BBC made was going to be the wrong one. But I totally kind of get where they're coming from, and it is a huge expense as we know. But when you kind of compare it directly with their rivals, it doesn't look great.
It just doesn't feel right to me having Olivier Giroud holed up in Salford during a World Cup. But anyway, enough of that nonsense. You've been on the road. Tell us all about your trip.
As I flagged last week, I've just got back from Dubrovnik. I was there for the E1 World Championship Power Boating E1 Series. Fascinating event. I mean, these boats are, I don't claim to have watched much of it. I've seen bits and pieces. And we've covered it, relatively substantially, origins of E1, Formula E, Extreme E. These are all Alejandro Agag properties. E1 was his latest one, power boating. I think they're in season 3 now. This was the 3rd race of the season. And these boats are incredible. I mean, you kind of went out on the water close to them, didn't get anywhere, near to getting in one. But they're amazingly fast. They don't make a noise, really, but they're not like Formula E, which gets criticised because it's just silent. There's a kind of nice humming noise to it, and they were, going around the glistening coast of Dubrovnik. I mean, it's an event that you need a beautiful kind of setting. Otherwise, it is just, boats on water. But this was fantastic. They had the key point of Dubrovnik right in that harbour bit. I know you've been there, Joe, before. It was around the kind of old walls and stuff, and it looked absolutely tremendous. So, yeah, it was my first experience of seeing it live. I was quite impressed.
Tell us about the commercial model then, because I know from a media perspective, clearly that's not where it's making its money. Where does it make money?
Yeah, so essentially, it's like a lot of these, look at a kind of Sal GP, who they are kind of very reluctant to be compared against, but it's a similar picture in a way that I think media is definitely their lowest pillar. I think they have 4 revenue pillars, they call it. There's host city fees, there are team sales, then sponsorships and partnerships, as they kind of bump them in together, and then media is probably about 10%. So I think it's probably around 50% would be the host city funding, and then around about 10% for media, and then 20% for sponsorship and the team sales themselves as well. So it's very difficult for these events to command media rights. As we know, they have a global non-exclusive deal with DAZN. Rights are, they also have other rights that they've sold. A lot of it is kind of focused on highlights or kind of as live roundups, and big kind of push to TikTok as well. That social coverage, as you can imagine, is big for them, but it's kind of an eyeball play rather than a rights fee play on that side of it. The host city fees are pretty formidable in certain cities. They do have, and I spoke to John Williams, the managing director, about this. You want your events in places like Dubrovnik. They have an event in Monaco. You want that kind of beautiful backdrop, but they are, traditional European cities that probably don't pay as much as a Jeddah or other, parts of the world where you kind of have to go to the balancing act between where you want to race that looks amazing and you can get a rights fee, a good hosting rights fee, and then, growing the commercial portfolio of the business. So that's a balance they have to strike. Sponsorship, they've kind of moved, I think, from an initial point of view, a lot of the deals were value in kind. So they'd strike sponsorship deal or partnerships really around funding the building of the race birds, the boats. That's kind of developed now. We're into season 3. They've got a deal with Bombay Sapphire Gin, which had a kind of a large area in the hospitality tent, and it really is a hospitality play as well. You look at this thing, there was a lot of money floating around the hospitality area. I like my watches. There were a lot of very, very nice watches on display there, and it felt like something, like a weekend event that you had to attend. So I think there's a big hospitality play, and as I say, media is quite low down. And then, as I say, there is the selling of the franchises, the teams, which I think they see there being growth in.
Yeah, I won't ask how much time you spent in the Bombay Sapphire tent.
Well, they banned them. They banned the media by and large. We managed to sneak in towards the end.
It was like a wise economic decision on their part. But team sales then, what does your E1 owner look like? Is it an American investor? Is it, say, the IPO model where we're looking at Indian conglomerates? Or is it kind of like this new wave of startup properties, celebrity driven?
Yeah, it's celebrity driven for sure. I mean, I don't know how much the celebrities are putting into this out of their own pocket. I'm sure they're taking a kind of investment stake, but it's very much driven by celebrities. There's 10 teams at the moment. Over half of them are backed by US celebrities, mainly from sport. So Tom Brady, he wasn't actually there, but LeBron James was there. Kyle Kuzma, another NBA player, was there. He owns a team with Thibaut Courtois, the Belgian goalkeeper. Will Smith, the actor, his team actually won this race. Then there's Mark Anthony, the singer-songwriter. I think he's connected to the Miami team. So it is kind of them as the figurehead. You've got Rafa Nadal in there as well. You've got, as I say, Thibaut Courtois, Didier Drogba's got a team. Virat Kohli has a team. So yes, they have an ownership stake, but it's very much what they can bring to the table, which is a huge social following. As I say, there is that hospitality vibe to these events. So it's lots of snappable content. And I think that is what they bring to the party. I talked to John Williams about this. I said, is there more to it than just being a celebrity? And, and they are keen to point out that, you have to be aligned with the values of E1, which is, sustainability. They want to be seen to be, promoting kind of clean technology, cleaning up at the oceans and stuff. So he said, celebrity team leadership has become a key part of the strategy in terms of how we build out our audience. So I think that's going to kind of remain core to them going forward.
You published a piece this week in your excellent and free newsletter On the Money about their investment search. So how much is E1 looking for and what do they actually want to do with that money?
Yeah, so this started a year ago, actually. They announced that they were under the former CEO, Roddy Basso. They were looking for 20 million euros. They engage Rothschild, seek an investor to inject capital. As I understand it, the Saudi Public Investment Fund, which no one has ever publicly said what the ownership is, we understand it's around 50% stake. They were perhaps offered the opportunity to increase that stake. They declined, but from what I heard from various sources. So they needed this 20 million. It's a year later, and I just think that shows that they're not rushing to get the wrong investor in. They very much see this as getting a strategic partner to sit alongside the PIF and Alejandro Agag, the founder, and the management team to really, I think they said, we don't want kind of passive investors, if you like. You need to be kind of heavily involved. So it's not going to be lots of little investors. It's going to probably be one strategic partner alongside the PIF. So they're close to finalizing that 20 million euros. What's it going to be spent on? Two things, really. Firstly, and the majority of the money is going to go into basically building another fleet of racecraft, the race birds. They're quite expensive by all accounts. In fact, one of them that we were watching lost its nose up into the sea, so that cost a fair bit of money to replace. So they have 10 at the moment. They want to increase the number of race birds, so essentially have a second fleet. The reason that would enable them then to host more events. So at the moment they host 8 races. They want to get up to around 12, potentially even 15 by the end of the decade. But they don't want to rely on air freight, obviously, because it's not very sustainable. What they want is these extra race birds that can then be kind of sent far in advance to other race locations. So essentially they would still have maybe 12, 14 events, but they've got the extra fleet of race birds that are already there. So a lot of the money is going to be spent on that to ensure they remain sustainable. And then there's going to be a bit of a deeper push into the US. Now, I mentioned the team owners side of it. They're well stocked with US team owners, and what that brings, I've explained. They have an event in Miami. Now, same with SailGP, other events like this. The US aren't paying a hosting fee. That's not how that model works in the US. You should be grateful to be coming here and racing. So it costs a bit of money to go out there, but they know they need to be in the US on the ground or on the water in the US to get the brands, the sponsors, the owners. So I think some of it's going to be spent on that soon. And by all accounts, within the next couple of weeks, months, that fundraising should close.
Watch this space. And being the top pro that you are, you were barely through passport control when you filed your first news story from on the ground in Dubrovnik, which was about PIF and their interest in E1. Now, given all the noise around Live Golf, around snooker, darts events in Saudi and so on, should E1 be worried about the plug being pulled on them?
Yeah, so this is what I kind of spoke to them about, John Williams. And as I mentioned, PIF's ownership is around 50%. They also have a very small stake in Formula E. So they've kind of been central to these properties. Their ownership stake was not the amount of it, but the news of it was announced in 2021 before E1 got off the ground in 2024. So they've kind of been there from the start, to say they're on the board. They have a sponsorship arrangement as well with Formula E, Extreme E, or I think Hydrogen E, I think it is now. Extreme H, sorry. And then E1 as well. So they've got actual branding on the boats. It says PIF, and they are fully committed by all accounts. The organisers, E1, have been, given assurances that PIF are there to stay. They race in Jeddah. They will continue to do so. He said, we've had very positive conversations, open conversations about how we build a strong partnership, not only on the investment side, but the sponsorship side. And I think we talked about this before with the PIF when the Live news broke. If they have a real kind of ownership stake in something and can see either the return on investment or in this case, what it's doing to promote green technology, which is important to Saudi Arabia and the kingdom, then they'll stick around with it. The issue with Live, the amount they were spending without the return, this is nowhere near the level of investment here. So the news from E1 is that partnership is as strong as ever. They're looking for an additional investor to sit alongside. So yeah, I don't think I would be too concerned if I was E1. I'd be hoping to continue the growth.
Thank you very much for that. If you want to hear more about John's time in Dubrovnik and the future of E1, then you can check out his piece, The Sport Business on the Money, this week. We're going to take a very quick FIFA-sanctioned hydration break. And when we come back, we'll be joined by Ben Cronin to discuss all things World Cup sponsorship.
Stay ahead in the business of sport with Sport Business newsletters, covering the biggest stories driving the industry. Delivered straight to your inbox at no cost. Sign up today at sportbusiness.com.
Hello, welcome back to the second proper part of the Sport Business Podcast. We are going inside the deals with Ben Cronin, editor of Sport Business Sponsorship. Ben, you have published a piece just last week on the sponsorship focus around the World Cup. But first and foremost, first few days into the tournament, what piqued your interest? What have you seen? Anything that surprised you from a boring branding point of view? Not on the pitch, I'm afraid. We're very much around the pitch focused.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think I'd be a poor substitute for Martin's more colourful on-the-ground reporting. But yeah, I mean, the things I've noticed from just watching it on TV, I think the LED advertising is very dynamic. It seems like brands have got a bit more freedom to, I wouldn't describe them as dynamic campaigns because that would suggest you're allowed to sort of react to sort of in-game action, but they definitely seem to be doing quite sort of lively campaigns that allow them to do a bit more than actually just talk about the individual brand name. From conversations with people, I've heard that they're not using virtual advertising this time. That's always been the big question. When are FIFA going to actually introduce virtual advertising at the World Cup? I'm told that they have been doing it in highlights packages. I was watching a few highlights packages in the office the other day. It's so good now, virtual advertising. It's very hard to say whether or not that is, indeed the case in every market and whether the feed I was watching was using virtual advertising. But yeah, I think they're still sort of testing the water a little bit on that. Other integrations, Lenovo appears on the ref cam. That's quite interesting because I was told by different sources that they've actually played a role in stabilizing the images in that. I think, I'm sure there'll be some sort of AI angle as well on that. You've got Hisense on the VAR, which always sort of boggles the mind. I'm always amazed that any brand would want to associate with something that's universally unpopular as VAR. But yeah, they've got an integration there. I think the connection is that they're using their TVs to assess whether or not someone's offside. And then Aramco are completely pervasive. And that's, in keeping with the fact that they've signed a absolute mega deal. As we described it, it's a sort of FIFA Partner Plus deal. And that also includes their Valvoline sub-brand, which is a US subsidiary that they bought. So yeah, they're very pervasive. And I think it's hard not to sort of see the geopolitical element to all of these deals, especially likes of Aramco, PIF, given what's happening in 2034 and them actually hosting the tournament.
Yeah, you mentioned Aramco there, and that was, a key part of the analysis piece you published last week, big Saudi brand, but also the number of US brands that have helped, obviously, given where the tournament is, that have driven this record sponsorship income for FIFA. Now, of course, we'll put a link to this analysis piece in the podcast notes, but can you just give us a little bit of an overview of where FIFA is coming into this tournament from a sponsorship point of view? Obviously, last week, Frank did the deep dive on media, so this is your chance.
Yeah, last time I went, we put our necks on the line and went with a sort of definitive number about how much we thought they'd generate. And we were very close. We came within sort of 3% the actual fee that they announced in the end. We've been a bit more hesitant this time just because they just haven't stopped announcing deals. They're still announcing supplier deals and everything else. And also I understand some sponsors are adding and subtracting rights. And there was a Unilever sub-brand that got announced the other day. And then we were sort of scrabbling around going, who's that? And then we found out that Unilever had bought them about a year ago. So it's a kind of movable feast at the moment. I mean, the big takeaways are in the sort of top tier, the FIFA partner tier. There's a preponderance. As I said, there seems to be a bit more of a geopolitical element to that tier than there is to some of the lower tiers. But we reported that 49% of the income in that tier is from Middle Eastern-based brands. Aramco is doing a lot of the heavy lifting. Our reporting is that that's nearly double the next comparable deal. ADI Predict Street has got the UAE connections. And also you've got Qatar Airways, which has come back despite it not being in Qatar this time.
Just explain for people like me who are perhaps a little bit less sponsorship minded, the sponsors that we see around the perimeter of matches, that's not it, is it? There's a lot more. What do those other sponsors get? And is that different in specific regions?
Yeah, so FIFA partners, the way it works, FIFA partners and World Cup sponsors, they get the perimeter takeovers. So that's when you just see just one brand all the way around the perimeter. World Cup sponsors as well, like the FIFA partners, they're investing the biggest sums in the tournament. So they get the perimeter takeovers. And then you get these World Cup supporter deals and they get shared rights. They won't be on a takeover at any time, but they'll be sharing with other brands. You'll see something like Smirnoff, and that's a Diageo sub-brand. And if you're a Diageo, you'll be able to activate multiple brands, and you'll see, I'm not sure if it's the case in this cycle, but last cycle there were some Coke sub-brands, and there were a lot of Coke sub-brands. There were like Minute Maid, Costa Coffee, and every time they'd appear, I'd be thinking, oh God, have we finished our work for this cycle, or has another sponsor been announced? And, and they've just started activating it. So beyond that, there are supplier deals, and I don't think they get any activation rights. And there's also this World Cup supporter tier, which is more of the regional supporter tier. And we use a VPN to establish exactly which markets they're activating in. And it's very difficult. One stage I was told there's a limit of 2 regions. If you're a World Cup supporter, you could activate in North America or you could activate in Europe. But some of them, we used a VPN to work out where they were appearing, and some of them are in multiple regions. But I'd be interested to understand how FIFA's been able to justify that, because they're kind of, to an extent, they're eating into the exclusivity of these global deals. Biggest brands are paying the biggest sums of money. I think what they might say is that they've got limited regional rights. Maybe they have a few countries in Europe, but they don't have the whole of Europe. And that allows them to do parts of MENA as well as North America. But I haven't had a definitive answer on that.
And as we've mentioned already, we published Frank Dunn's piece about the media rights last week. And one of the things that Frank picked up on was innovation. So he mentioned in particular the social media preferred partner scheme, which sees TikTok and YouTube gain elevated rights in return for what is a quite decent minimum guarantee. Are there any examples of innovation within the sponsorship field?
I think it's more of a cookie cutter approach this time. The FIFA partner model is not broken. So, they didn't really need to fix it. World Cup sponsor is a very attractive, a very appealing sort of tier. The innovation really has been in that sort of World Cup supporter tier, the regional tier. So last time they had a maximum of 4 brands for any given region. This time, as a way of sort of attracting as many US brands as possible, they've kind of taken that cap, that 4 sponsors per region cap off. And I'm told the model was based on what they did for the Women's World Cup in 2023. And they got a load of New Zealand and Australia-based sponsors for that tournament. We, again, using the old VPN, we worked out that there were 11 sort of US or North America, Canada-focused sponsors. They've managed to attract a lot more US-based brands based on moving and sort of adapting that regional supporter model. And the asking prices as well have gone up significantly. They were asking about 4 to 10 million US dollars per cycle last time for those regional supporter deals. And this time we've heard that the asking price is 40 to 50 million and more in some cases. There are 1 or 2 exceptions.
Ben, I just wanted to ask, FIFA, this tournament's still, only just underway, and already they'll be looking at the next quadrennial, the next cycle. Where does the sponsorship portfolio look at the moment going forward from a kind of FIFA partner level, and then at your kind of crystal ball gazing and see where they can go with the development of these supporter level?
From what I understand, that's the job that Dan Haddad, formerly of Octagon, has been brought on board to do for them, to sort of create a new model that will work for the next cycle. And I think, again, it will be in that sort of regional supporter tier, and they've got a multi-host model again. So it'd be interesting to see which regions in particular step up to support that. I know Moroccan brands were very heavy supporters of the African Cup of Nations when they hosted it. You'd imagine Spanish brands will also have a big role and possibly, deliver the lion's share of that sort of regional sponsorship income. I mean, they've already got contracted revenue. They've already got FIFA partner revenue that's locked in until 2030. Coke and Adidas are locked into 2030. They're legacy deals, so they're not looked on, from what I understand, quite so fondly in FIFA because they got very, very decent rates because they were agreed a very long time ago. And now, with inflation in the category and the, deals like they've done with Aramco, they're looking like very good value if you're a Coke or an Adidas. I think Qatar, off the top of my head, Qatar Airways is locked in till 2030, and I think Visa is locked into 2030 as well.
Ben, you've reported extensively on the new Champions League sponsorship cycle, the changes that are coming there. Did that create any opportunities for FIFA, perhaps with some sponsors who are falling off the Champions League, looking for another global property to align with?
I actually predicted, it just shows the peril of predicting things, but I thought that AB InBev might not renew their World Cup deal because they'd put so much money towards the UEFA Champions League deal. And yet, lo and behold, just before the start of this tournament, they actually did renew it until 2030. But yeah, I think John and I both previously registered a bit of skepticism about whether they want to support it in 2034 when it's in Saudi Arabia, and they might face what they had in 2022 when there was the pouring rights ban. I mean, it's very early to be saying. They still haven't officially announced that many deals for the Champions League, but you've got MasterCard, which is Visa's competitor. I think it sort of incentivizes, even though Visa are locked in until 2030, it's sort of, I think those two are probably quite happy that they've got the properties they have, and Visa would be loath to lose that FIFA deal in the context of that MasterCard Champions League renewal.
Ben, final one from me on the makeup of the portfolio going forward. How heavily dictated is it by where the tournament is? Do you expect US brands will just naturally drop off? MENA, you said, was 49% of the pie. Do you expect that to get bigger given we're heading to Saudi Arabia in 2034?
I don't know. I mean, yeah, and in the last cycle, they always benefited with 2 cycles worth of deals this time, because a lot of US brands came in for 2022 and it was perceived that they were sort of jostling for position, currying favour ahead of the real sort of crown jewel, which was 2026. And also that was the case with the Club World Cup, that they were, a lot of those deals for the Club World Cup, although they were separate, they were sort of jockeying for position with 26 as well.
Ben, before we let you go, you are on the road this week, not quite to the World Cup, but to another very interesting international event.
That's right. Yeah, I'm going to the Global Esports Industry Week in Cologne. So I'm a self-confessed neophyte when it comes to esports. So I'm hoping someone can actually fill me in, allow me to speak with a bit more authority about it. But yeah, that's the next 3 days, Wednesday to Friday in Cologne. I was invited to an esports event at the weekend, but sadly I wasn't able to make that.
Ben, enjoy. Safe travels. Please do let us know how that trip was. I was in Cologne for, I think it was the German Super Cup a few years ago. It was in Leverkusen, but we were all staying in Cologne, and there was a big esports event going on at the arena opposite us. And I couldn't believe the number of people that were traveling from all over the world to attend this event. So you'll learn plenty, I'm sure. Safe travels, and we will see you on the podcast soon. We're going to take a break, and we'll be back with the final part of the Sport Business Podcast.
Stay ahead in the business of sport with trusted news, data, and analysis across media rights, sponsorship, and more. Explore our subscription options at sportbusiness.com.
Welcome back. It's time for Any Other Business and our look ahead to what's coming up in sport business. John, let's start with you. You broke an exclusive story this week, which you can read in the notes, about the IOC's media rights.
Yeah, it's some changes that are coming. A look ahead to who's going to be in a big position there. The IOC has launched a search for a new head of media rights. Now, we understand that is because 2 key executives from that department, Johan Lacroix, who's the senior manager of media rights, and Nicolas Bergers, who's the media rights manager in that team. 2 very senior figures have worked across the IOC for a number of years. Previously, both worked in football, CAA and team respectively. They're both leaving the IOC in the next few months. They're kind of a key part of a 6-strong media rights team at the IOC. I think the wider media and content team have around 14 to 15 people. So they're leaving for pastures new. It's a pretty senior role there. Head of media rights going to be working alongside Jerome Parmentier, the VP of media rights and content partnership. So, we've written, we don't need to tell the audience of our podcast the importance of the media rights revenue to the IOC, and whoever gets this gig is going to be front and center of some pretty interesting deals that are going to be, what happens when a new manager comes in? It's on the top of the agenda or the top of the desk or whatever we would call it. Perhaps you can fill us in on what they're going to be doing.
Yeah, the IOC might need a new manager bounce in India. That's been a persistent challenge now. Like, there were some expectations, not necessarily within the IOC, but perhaps within the industry at large, that adding cricket to the Olympic program was going to be something of a silver bullet for the IOC's rights in India. That hasn't proven to be the case. It's been very challenging, much like it was the FIFA World Cup. So that's something that will be top of the in-tray. There's also a question of what happens in MENA beyond LA28. So there was a relatively short-term deal done there to tide the IOC over with beIN for the next couple of games. But beyond that, that is not guaranteed. What we understand is that hosting is going to be a factor in what happens there. So Qatar is going for the 2036 games alongside India, actually, in Ahmedabad. And perhaps it's no great coincidence then that those are two of the outstanding deals to be done. Obviously, only one of them can get those games, which will make finding value in the other perhaps more challenging. And on top of that, obviously, the IOC is an international organization, is looking across all sorts of markets. You and I, John, know that perhaps it's looking at some slightly more innovative approaches, having seen the success that the World Cup's had, particularly with some of its streaming deals. So yeah, plenty for the next person to be doing. And I've seen already on LinkedIn lots of activity around that vacancy. I'm sure they'll have no shortage of applications. So yes, we'll look ahead to whoever gets appointed to that.
Yeah, well, get your applications in. Not you, Joe. Stay with us, please. I wanted to ask you about your future Amazon documentary watching as we go into our any other business section. What's on the calendar for, well, it'd be summer 2027, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I can't work out if this is in any other business or a look way, way, way ahead into the distance. But yeah, Manchester United is the latest club to let the Amazon cameras in as part of the All or Nothing series, and they're going to document the upcoming 26-27 season. Michael Carrick's first full season as permanent Manchester United manager.
If he lasts that long.
Exactly. As you well know, they follow in the footsteps of clubs like Arsenal, Tottenham, Man City, Juve, New Zealand All Blacks even did a series, and a lot of NFL franchises have done as well. The Athletic has reported that Manchester United previously turned down a £10 million offer from Amazon, which they said at the time was the largest participation fee that had been offered. So one assumes it's slightly above that, then United perhaps making an 8-figure sum out of this. But as we know, it hasn't always worked out well, letting the cameras in. Sunderland comes to mind as the prime example, but there are others as well. And as a fan of a club that has previously featured in this series, what can Man United fans expect?
Some embarrassment from, there was some pretty, I think if you've watched
the light bulb moment, is that what we're talking about?
Well, there's the light bulb. There's, I think, blasting "You'll Never Walk Alone" in training and then promptly losing 4-0 the next game at Anfield. I've watched a lot of the NFL ones. I loved them mainly because I'm a fan of the sport, but I'm not a fan of a team necessarily. So I found the insights really interesting. I actually found the Arsenal one interesting in the sense I think they were a bit more open to, it was an interesting season to follow them with some of the high-profile player exits, and I think that there were players that came across quite well. I don't think it was as sanitized. The Manchester City one was just a puff piece. It was, you didn't learn anything. I didn't particularly like that. I think all these things are better when there's failure than success, let's be honest. And there was on the Arsenal one just right at the end of the season. So I think it gives a really interesting insight into these players, the stresses they go through, the personal experiences, putting their body on the line for this. So, yeah, I think if I was a Man U fan, I'd be excited about watching it, but kind of slightly apprehensive about some of the cringy things you may well see. But I don't get the impression Michael Carrick is a light bulb manager, so they might be okay.
These things, as you say, they sort of live and die by both the access and the match footage. Now, we don't know how much access they will be given. You would assume there is some contractual requirements for certain access, certain cameras and so on around the training ground. But in terms of match footage, obviously, Amazon no longer has Premier League rights in the UK. That's not to say that they can't do any sort of deal for footage. But they are a Champions League broadcaster, and Man United are back in the Champions League next season. So there is some sort of synergy there, I guess. Anyway, enough about Man U. I can see the pain on your face as we labour the Man United point. So let's go to our final AOB. And this is something that's really going to be able to uplift everyone.
Yeah, great story. I mean, obviously, the story so far of a very, very early World Cup is Cape Verde's 0-0 draw with Spain, one of the tournament favourites. The great thing about Cape Verde for me is the kit supply. Do you know who the kit supplier is, Joe?
I don't.
Okay, so it's Capelli Sport. It's a New York.
Capelli, of course.
Yeah, Capelli.
Famous Capelli.
Famous, well, exactly. Barely done anything before. They've got a couple of football teams. They've got, I think, the Serbia national team was their big one that they got end of last year. And I think they'd banked on Serbia being their World Cup participant, and they didn't qualify. So they missed out on the tournament at the end of last year. Cape Verde had already qualified. So in January, Capelli did a kit deal with them. If you go on the Capelli website this morning. Now, I didn't go on it earlier on in the week, I have to say, so I couldn't vouch for whether it was already gone, but I'm reliably informed 24 hours after they played Spain, you can no longer buy the blue Cape Verde shirt. It is sold out on the website. So if you've got $90, you'll have to be spending it somewhere else. It just took me back to the success of the Iceland team back in 2016 when they beat a quite dreadful England team. And there was a company called Aria who had basically gone through the tough times of Icelandic football and had never kind of got any benefit out of it. And then the eureka moment of Euro 2016, and they sold out massively. I think most of the shirts were sold dispatched to houses in Scotland. And then just a few years later, Aria were dumped when Iceland FA went with Puma for a bigger deal. So I hope Capelli have built in some kind of long-lasting contract into that to Cape Verde deal. You can still buy the away shirt. It's white. It's not quite as nice as the blue one. But a nice feel-good story to round out the our World Cup pod this week.
Yeah, brilliant story. I see that Vozinha, the star goalkeeper, climbed to 5 million followers overnight. So hopefully he's got himself a brand deal lined up as well off the back of it. But very well done and good luck to Clifton.
Yeah, well, maybe we can get him to, maybe if Martin's out there, he can get him to retweet our pod and we'll get a few more listeners. But that is it for this week's podcast. As always, for the most accurate rights fees across media and sponsorship and all the latest breaking news from the global sports business industry, please visit sportbusiness.com. We will be back with another podcast next week. Thanks for listening.